of chest.
Welcome to Our Weird World. I'm your host, John Henson, and today it is the 23rd Weird Fun Bag, and I am extremely caffeinated. All right, so, a few weeks back, I told you, like, shortly after the birth of my second child, I was trying to find ways to combat, the interrupted sleep schedule, the overwhelming just shutdown that comes with being screamed at incessantly for hours on end, and then adding a toddler on top of that, right? So what I started doing, I got this giant, 50-ounce tumbler, stainless steel, super nice. I always never understood, the whole Stanley Cup phenomenon and how... my wife has 6 of these cups. She got one for almost every day of the week and then some. I didn't get the hype, right? Because I'm not the kind of guy who just has to have a drink all the time. I don't need to take my coffee on the road. I don't need to keep it hot or anything like that, right? Well, I get it now, right? Because what I started doing was I took an energy drink and then I took a Gatorade for health. And I started mixing them together. And that was fine, right? But then I realized, oh man, this isn't carbonated enough. Because I like that sensation. I like the tinglies. Not finishing that sentence. Anyway, and so where was I? Yeah, I was doing the energy drink and the Gatorade, right? Energy drink, whether it's a Ghost or a C4 or Celsius. The Celsius is a little low on the caffeine, but the Reign, so that's anywhere from 200 to 300 milligrams, right? Depending on what you get, right? So that's 200 to 300 milligrams caffeine. That's good for the day, right? You can just sip on that all day and you can feel normal, right? And then the Gatorade or the Body Armor, Powerade, whatever you want. I was matching that with the flavor of the energy drink, right? So, if it's blue raspberry, Sour Patch Kid energy drink, I was getting the cool blue Gatorade, right? Because it's the same flavor. Fruit punch, that's pretty straightforward. There's cherry, there's grape. There's too much orange dreamsicle. Not a fan of that. So, haven't been doing a ton of orange, but so I was doing that for a while. Then I realized it's not carbonated enough because the ratio of the Gatorade to the energy drink, there's just too much Gatorade in there. So then what I was all right, well, look, I can't add more caffeine, right? I need a soda in here, but I can't add more caffeine. Well, guess what, guys? Sprite, no caffeine, all right? Fanta, no caffeine. So now, but sugar, yeah. So, but that's fine. That's fine, guys, because there's no sugar in the energy drinks, and I can get 0 sugar Gatorade. So it's fine. It's not whatever. So what I've been doing is I've got several combinations, and I usually just top that with a Sprite or a 7-Up or whatever, right? So that's been great. The problem that I've been running into is I will usually have this. I'm usually pretty good up until about lunchtime, around 11 a.m. or whatever. So then I'll pour the drink, I'll mix my cocktail, and then I'll just be sipping on it a little bit, and it'll be doing great. I'll be feeling good, everything's great, and then it'll get to 3 o'clock, and I'm at that age, man, where if I have caffeine after 4, I'm not sleeping. I'm not going to bed until 2 in the morning. I don't understand why that is what it is, but it is. So then I panic, and I've got to just chug whatever's left of my cocktail, and it's usually still 16, 20 ounces of fluid. I'm just chugging it. And so oh man, I just get a huge shot of caffeine and a rush, and it's fun. It's a good time. Other than when my heart feels like it's about to explode, especially when I'm stressed and irritated, because I'm usually towards the end of the day and I've had 10 hours of buffoonery and stuff just in my face all day and just overstimulated and I'm ready to quit. But instead, I get myself even more wound up with just this caffeine shot. So, we're not perfect. And with that, it's Weird Fun Bag number 23. I know you didn't need to hear any of the last 5 minutes of that, but there you go. 3 stories, as always. Looking at the stories of Thomas Maimoni, the Khamar Daban Incident, and then our first story will be of the New Mexico Penitentiary Riot.
Story time. Story time. Story time? Story time.
So in 1980, the state penitentiary of New Mexico was in really bad shape. It was super overcrowded. They had 1,156 inmates, but fewer than 975 beds. That's a problem. The dormitories were extremely unsanitary. The food quality was poor and constantly surrounded by mice and cockroaches. And many of the education and rehabilitative programs had been canceled due to budget cuts in the state. And that's fair. New Mexico, a lot of people, at least out here, and maybe it's more common out west where they're dealing with it a lot more. But over here on the East Coast, we talk a lot about West Virginia, Mississippi, South Carolina, Alabama, right? Those are our poor places. But New Mexico, typically in that same group, among the poorest states in the country. And so, of course, when the state has to cut stuff out of the budget, prisoners should get stuff cut from the prison. You're in prison. You don't need, luxury and stuff. Fine, cool. It's great if we can educate and rehabilitate them, but also they're in prison. So I don't know, man. I don't feel bad about it. With little to do now because of these budget cuts, though, prisoners were locked down for long periods of time, which created unhealthy levels of discontent and tension among the prison population. Oh, what? Prisoners mad because they're in prison? Whoa, genius. Exacerbating this problem was a complete lack of separation between the violent offenders and just the people who were there for DUIs and, minor possession and, fraud or whatever. There was also this growing snitch system that created just as much distrust among the inmates as it did with the guards, who in turn were also tense because the prison was, of course, understaffed and overworked. Now, a lot of the trouble had started back in 1976 when inmates organized a work strike to protest the prison's poor living conditions. And in response to this work strike, Deputy Warden Robert Montoya ordered the dormitories to be tear gassed, which seems a bit much. When the striking inmates ran out, Montoya then had his guards lined up, basically like a gauntlet. Basically made the inmates run a gauntlet through the guards, who then beat the prisoners with axe handles as they ran past. Despite a 99-page civil rights complaint known as the Duran Consent Decree and 10 grand jury investigations exposing a ton of issues inside the prison, the New Mexico state legislature refused to allocate any more of the state's already meager budget to fix the problems. Well, in the early morning hours of February 2nd, 1980, several prisoners got drunk off of homemade liquor that they had been brewing inside of the prison. Over the last several days leading up to this point, prisoners had been talking about just taking over the prison, surmising that they could do a better job of governing themselves rather than the warden and his stressed out, overworked guards. At 1:40 a.m., as the officers performed their nightly count in dormitory E2, 2 prisoners launched their plan into action and jumped the officer before he could lock the door for the night. Now, in the confusion of all of this happening, the 3 other officers performing the count were quickly taken hostage, allowing all of the prisoners in E2 to rush out and attack the officers performing the checks in other dorms. In just 20 minutes, the prisoners had taken complete control of the prison after they broke into the main control room and made sure that everything was unlocked. And then, of course, from there, not harmonious utopia, not clear hierarchical, authority control, top down organizational structure, assigning tasks, working to actually make the prison a better place. No. Gang wars. Because of course, right? On one side were the Chicanos, who worked their way through the prison yard and carried out attacks on prisoners that they held grudges against for a variety of reasons. On the other side was the Aryan Brotherhood, of course, led by the prison's most violent offenders. They broke into cell block 4, which held the prisoners labeled as informers, who were basically just this group of nonviolent, mentally ill sex offender inmates who had snitched in the past on the more violent people and needed to be punished. Well, on the way to cell block 4, the Aryan Brotherhood broke into the psychology wing and confiscated all of the psychiatric drugs they could get their hands on before setting fire to the office and destroying all of the prison records. Now, once the Aryans arrived at cell block 4, already under the very heavy influence of the psychiatric drugs that they stole, the prisoners then used blowtorches they had found that had been left by a construction crew and cut through the grills and bars in the cells to get to those inmates. Because it then took hours to burn through the steel, the Brotherhood took turns with the blowtorches, while others raided the records office to figure out who exactly had been snitching and who they should get to first. By morning, the inmates were communicating with outside prison officials via walkie-talkie and letting them know what they were about to do. So, as the sun began to rise, they're finally getting, able to saw through these iron bars in these cells, which is weird. They couldn't just find the keys or figure out how to. They have to take a blowtorch to do it. They're stupid. They're in prison. As the sun began to rise, the Aryan Brotherhood's execution squad finally broke through to cell block 4, took prisoners out of their cells one by one, and started brutally torturing them. Despite crying to prison officials for help, nothing happened because the guards were either tied up or restrained, or they were kicked out and outside of the prison just watching everything unfold. And here's what happened. Inmates were beaten to death with tear gas guns and pipes. One specifically was beaten to death with a toilet seat. Most of them were raped before and or after they died. One inmate had a piece of steel rebar driven completely through his head. That's crazy. Another inmate was hanged and then tossed over the second-tier balcony before being pulled back up and hacked into pieces. One inmate who had previously been gang raped by 7 other prisoners and subsequently filed a lawsuit against them was hanged, had his throat slashed, and then had his genitals cut off and stuffed into his mouth. Another inmate had a blowtorch blasted directly into his face, inside, basically they took this blowtorch, wrapped his mouth around it, and turned it on, and just kept it on until his face or until his eyes and his head exploded from the pressure. Whoa. Dozens of bodies were also piled in the prison gymnasium and set on fire, which then quickly got out of control and ignited the roof of the gymnasium. By 6 a.m., this is all before 6 a.m., by the way. The rioters were ready to start negotiations, I guess because they'd killed everybody they were ready to kill. It began with a demand for a doctor to come and treat the wounded guards, and also for a press conference and for Warden Montoya to resign. Montoya, who had been trying to negotiate since 2:30 a.m., was done. He's not having any of it. And so by 8:30, police formally recognized 4 inmates as official spokesmen for the riot, one of whom was the author of the original Durand consent decree, who then reiterated 11 of the demands originally outlined in his decree from back in 1976. Well, Back inside the prison, less violent inmates were caring for injured guards and gave them food before disguising them as inmates and escorting them out of the prison so they could get medical attention, because otherwise, like, the rest of the prisoners weren't going to let them go. From there, however, negotiations stalled, which was more or less done on purpose at the suggestion of New Mexico Governor Bruce King's negotiator. And then the following afternoon, finally, 36 hours after the riot had begun, heavily armed state police officers entered the prison, most of which had been burned. Much of which at this point had been burned, like the buildings and everything had been burned down. The official death toll was listed at 33 people, most of whom were murdered, though some had overdosed on drugs. Although 50 inmates were charged with crimes relating to the riot, most of the charges were either dropped or reduced, with the steepest punishment only being 9 extra years added to a sentence. After pledging $38 million in emergency funds for the cleanup and restoration of the prison, the New Mexico government refused to make any sweeping reforms to the prison for nearly 20 more years. Because why learn from your mistakes? Meanwhile, back in the prison, as many as 8 more people were murdered in revenge killings from the riot over the next several years. The prison officially closed in 1998 and was replaced with a new facility, which presumably operates a little better, is a little bit nicer. The original prison still exists in some form and is now used as a movie set, and you can actually go visit. You can take tours where they talk heavily about the riot, and you can still see remnants of the riot if you are into super gory and depressing stuff like that. Moving on now to July 12th, 1991, when 37-year-old Martha Brailsford went sailing with her neighbor, 46-year-old Thomas Maimoni, in Massachusetts Bay near Salem. The next morning, Maimoni returned home without Brailsford, which definitely was not supposed to happen, and Brailsford, her husband, immediately reported her missing. Now, why you're just letting your wife go sailing alone with your neighbor is weird. I don't know. Just maybe they had a good relationship. I don't know. Although everyone claimed to have last seen Martha Brailsford with Thomas Maimoni, he denied ever taking her on his boat. However, 2 days later, he changed his story after a boat shop owner told police he had literally seen the two get on Maimoni's boat and sail off. Maimoni then claimed that he had taken Brailsford to the Winter Island Pier, where she had just gotten off and walked away, and he never saw her again. When he didn't really have a good response for why he didn't bother trying to bring her back, Maimoni then claimed that a rogue wave had hit his boat and knocked her into the water. Although he claimed to have searched the waters all night, he never found her, and then I guess just kind of like just decided he was going to pretend like nothing had ever happened. Like, again, it's really weird. For the next 6 days, police and divers searched all over Massachusetts Bay, but could not find Brailsford's body. And without a body, and with Maimoni basically changing his story every day, police got super desperate. Now, because they were near Salem, Massachusetts, police turned to Lori Cabot, a local psychic. After getting Brailsford's name, address, and date of birth, Cabot went into her like fancy little psychic alpha state, where she then received a vision of exactly what happened on the boat. So, according to this psychic, Maimoni tried to make some sexual advances on Brailsford, who was just like trying to have some fun and create her own little Titanic moment over up on the front of the ship. And then when Brailsford rejected Maimoni's advances, the two got into an argument. Maimoni got angry because he couldn't get up in them guts and picked up an item from the boat, bonked Brailsford's head over the head with it, and knocked her out. While Brailsford was unconscious, he then tied her ankle to an anchor, added weights to her waist, and dumped her overboard near a small island offshore with a lighthouse in view, because this is the vision that she had, right? Well, on July 18th, a few hours after Cabot kind of relayed this vision to police, a lobster fisherman was checking his traps near Marblehead Rock when he noticed that one of his traps had gotten attached to an anchor, which was wrapped around some rope and fishing line. He then pulled the line out of the water and found Brailsford's body completely naked with wounds on her head. So it's like pretty, because from Marblehead Rock, you can also then see like a lighthouse nearby. So like crazy that like this vision was kind of true. And when police realized that this vision had been correct, they went looking for Maimoni. However, he had already fled the area, forcing police to return to Cabot for help in finding him because, it clearly worked. She knew where this woman's body was. Maybe she could have a little psychic vision and figure out where Maimoni was. So she goes back in her little trance or whatever, and she soon received a vision that Maimoni had shaved his giant, Steve Harvey caterpillar mustache that he had and was on his way to Canada. She offered police to cast a spell to derail his plans, which actually didn't seem like a weird thing to say because she had been 100% right on everything so far. And so police were just like, yeah, go ahead. So she quickly crafted a straw doll that she named Tom and astrally projected herself into Maimoni's world somehow. I don't know how any of that works. In an attempt to get him to do something careless to get caught. Well, guess what? On July 20th, the people in the town of Waite, Maine, less than 30 miles from the Canadian border, noticed that a vacant cabin now had an unfamiliar car sitting outside of it. Police arrived a few minutes later to find Maimoni without a mustache, sleeping on the couch just as Cabot had predicted. During the trial, it was discovered that Maimoni often used the story of his wife having recently died of cancer as a way to guilt women into going sailing with him. Maimoni's wife was actually completely healthy, by the way. And then once out on the water, Maimoni would strip down and captain the boat completely naked as, I guess, like a party trick or something, and usually try to get frisky with the women he brought on board. He was eventually convicted of second-degree murder and given a life sentence, and then he died in prison on October 18th, 2017. Our final story here, I teased this a little bit last week. So we talked about the Dyatlov Pass incident back on episode 24. It was one of the first stories, first episodes that we did. Really famous kind of quasi-paranormal story out of Russia. These kids, these super experienced skiers or whatever, they go up into this crazy mountain pass. Some weird stuff happens. They all die or whatever. And no one can figure out what happened to them. Well, a similar incident happened in 1993 when 41-year-old Ludmila Korovina, a super experienced hiking teacher, planned to hike with 6 of her students in the Khamar Daban mountain range in southern Siberia. So on August 2nd, the group of 7 arrived at the town of Marino to begin their hike. It was 23-year-old Sasha Kresin, 24-year-old Tatiana Filipenko, 19-year-old Denis Svachkin, 17-year-old Valya Udachenko, 16-year-old Victoria Zalasova, and then 15-year-old Timur Bapanov. Really young people, right? Well, the first 2 days of the hike up to Retransliator Peak. All right. It went well. The group was pushing hard to make good time. Got to the top, whatever. Everything's great, cool, woo, views. As they began their descent, they encountered a strong storm that took them by surprise since the weather forecast had promised clear weather all week. The group decided to camp in an exposed area overnight to rest and then meet up with Ludmila's daughter, Natalia, who was leading her own group of hikers in the area over the next day. When Ludmila's group never showed up, Natalia figured they had just gotten off schedule, that nothing was wrong, that they just meet up later, fine, whatever, stuff like that happens all the time, right? And this is also in the 90s. It's not like you have cell phones that you can just immediately contact someone. It's like you say you're going to meet someone somewhere and then they never show up. And you just kind of assume something came up, we'll catch up later. But things were very wrong. A week later, on August 10th, a group of kayakers on a river at the base of the mountain were paddling downstream when they saw a girl covered in dried blood standing on the banks staring at them. The girl was 17-year-old Valya Udachenko, and she immediately became hysterical as she tried to tell them the story of what happened. She was quickly taken to the nearest police station, but Udachenko struggled to communicate exactly what happened. Without many details to go off of, authorities didn't really conduct a search for the rest of the hikers for more than 2 weeks after the incident. They did recover the bodies, though. They did go up there. They found everybody, or they found most everybody, I think. And autopsies revealed that basically everyone had died from hypothermia except for Ludmila Korovina, the teacher. She had died from a heart attack. Everyone also had bruised lungs and a protein deficiency, but all 6 deaths were ruled as an accident. Years later, Udachenko had finally recovered from her trauma. It took her years to get over this. She finally recovered from her trauma, and she was able to go to authorities and tell them what happened. So she basically explained that, like, as the group descended the mountain, they heard Sasha Creason, 23-year-old, one of the other students, cry out. When they turned back to look at him, they saw him frothing at the mouth with blood pouring out of his eyes and ears. Ludmila, the teacher, the main person on the hike, she goes back up to help him. But she also, like, as soon as she gets up close to him, she also started bleeding from her eyes and nose and also started frothing at the mouth before she collapsed on top of Sasha. Tatiana Filipenko then goes up to the two of them and she tries to help before she started clutching her throat, basically like if she was getting force choked by Darth Vader. She then crawled over to a rock and bashed her head against it until she knocked herself unconscious. Not crawling back down to where she could get more air. She like goes insane and starts bashing her own head against a rock until she knocks herself unconscious. At that point, Victoria Zalisova and Timur Bapanov, they decide to start running down the mountain, but they only made it a few yards before they began throwing up blood, scratching at their throats, and then ripping off their clothes before they collapsed and died. So now, with only Denis Svachkin and Valya Udachenko remaining alive, they start running down the mountain together. But then, like a few minutes later, Denis begins convulsing and collapses. And at that point, Udachenko just drops all of her hiking gear and just starts booking it. Like, she was already running before, but like you got like probably 40 pounds of hiking gear on you. She drops all that and she is hauling down this mountain as fast as she could. And then sometime later, I don't know, once she felt relatively safe, she set up her tent and tried to get some sleep. Well, the next morning, she woke up to the realization that she was actually going to need some supplies in order to make it back down. The problem was that the only supplies, probably several miles in any direction, were with the 6 dead bodies back up the mountain. So, reluctantly, she retraced her steps back up to the bodies, found everybody, grabbed what she needed, and then followed power lines down the ridge in hopes of just finding someone. She followed these power lines for 4 days, eventually arriving at the river, and then she started following it until she came across those kayakers who rescued her. Well, when Udachenko's story went public, people kind of started to speculate that the hikers had accidentally walked into like some top secret Russian military experiment and were like shot on sight with a police cover-up later on. And that seems totally plausible because Russia. The problem, though, was that the area that this group was hiking in was very popular with tourists, especially in the summer months. And so it would seem unlikely that they would stumble upon like a secret government operation in a huge tourism area. Other people thought that the hikers had been exposed to a highly toxic nerve agent, specifically Novichok gas, which would not only explain the bleeding and frothing at the mouth, but also the bruised lungs and heart attack that Ludmila suffered. There were records indicating that the government had tested the gas in more remote, higher altitude areas of the mountains, and that perhaps the freak rainstorm that hit the group caused those gas particles that had been trapped in the soil and rock farther up the mountain to rush downhill and expose the hikers. Alternatively, the hikers could have been drinking contaminated water that they had brought from Lake Baikal, known around the country for being a toxic waste dumping ground. Who knows? Some think that the hikers accidentally and unknowingly ingested too many psilocybin mushrooms while foraging for food during the hike. Apparently, a common hallucination caused by psilocybin is to see people bleed out of their eyes, which sounds like a great time. I have never done mushrooms. I kind of want to. If that's a common thing you see, that's crazy. But like, also, I feel like I would hope in that moment, I would be like, oh man, I got to remember I'm on drugs right now. So the likelihood that what I'm seeing is real isn't real. But who knows? Overdosing on psilocybin could also result in severe convulsions and heart attacks, which could explain everything that happened. But no one really knows. Obviously, though, it was aliens, you guys. Like, aliens came down, attacked them, and that was it. But no one, other than that, no one really knows.
All done.
There we go. Weird fun bag number 23 in the books. That was a pretty intense one this week. Like, I feel like the last few have just been kind of silly, a little lighthearted. This was pretty intense. All right. So sorry if you weren't expecting that, but it is what it is sometimes. So let's recap and see what we learned today.
What did we learn?
Number 1, 1980 New Mexico Penitentiary Riot. Just crazy, right? You've got Chicanos versus the Aryan Brotherhood. Of course, the Aryan Brotherhood is like the most violent side of it. And they either go through and systematically murder inmates that snitched on them, or they like overdosed on psychotic drugs. That checks out. But almost burned the prison down. Just a crazy thing that happened. Number 2, Thomas Maimoni takes his neighbor out on a boat, tries to get up in them guts. She denies him. He kills her. And then they use a psychic. And the psychic was apparently right about everything on multiple occasions. I don't understand how that works at all. But if you take ghost tours and such like that in Salem, like they will actually talk about this murder. Because I think that's how I first heard about this story. I was doing a ghost tour in Salem and heard about it. Number 3, the Khamar Daban Incident, similar to Dyatlov Pass, but this poor girl just turns around and sees people frothing at the mouth and bleeding out of their eyes and ears, which is crazy. And no one knows why. Was it mushrooms? Was it the government? Was it like remnants of a super toxic nerve agent that the government had tested? No one knows. But also probably aliens.
What did we learn?
Next week on Our Weird World, we're back to one other single story. Going back to World War II, we talk about, everybody knows about Hitler, about the concentration camps. You've probably heard the name Joseph Mengele, one of Hitler's most, high-ranking officials. We're going to talk about his story and go into all the crazy things he was a part of. So, going to be for sure a heavy episode next weekend or next week. So, get ready for that. This dude sucked. And so we're going to learn about it, be sad for the Jews, and then we're going to move on. So that's all you can do in this world, I guess, is just move on. So come back next week for that story. Thank you so much for continuing. I have no idea why I said any of the things I just said. God, I am so tired, but I'm not because caffeine. Anyway, thank you for listening. Keep telling all your friends. Keep it weird. I got to go run something. Jesus Christ.
This is a podcast.